Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. Drop the prime time, bitch!
Welcome to me SaWGuy podcast show. As always, I'm the SaWGuy. I try to do my Leprechaun voice, but I fucked that up. But anyways, welcome to episode 12. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that little green, ugly-looking son of a bitch, the Leprechaun, right? How many of us have seen that movie and been like, what the hell, right? But believe it or not, there's a lot of good, but a little bad with the series. But I wanted to use this episode because, obviously, SaWGuy ain't never late, but he was late on dropping the ball for St. Patty's Day, which was last week. Okay, whatever. But I figured, give y'all some luck, let y'all play a little bit, do what you gotta do on St. Patty's Day, have your green beer, all that good stuff, Then I come back, so that way y'all know what the Leprechaun's all about, right? Well, anyways, let's get started on this shit, right? So, the Leprechaun series. What the hell is this series, right? Well, if you've never seen the Leprechaun, because I know I have a couple of fans that never follow the series, look it up, because it's a movie that's no joke. It basically follows all the original paths of what a leprechaun is, right? A leprechaun could only be put to sleep, could be, held at ransom only if it has a 4-leaf clover on him, right? So, out of the whole series, you have 7 of them total, right? Well, 9 if you include the straight-to-TV things that they have, or the red box, but I'm going to go with 7, because the 7 of them that were out, you had the one original actor that played in all 6 of them. The 7th one, they tried to reboot it. It was a WWE film, but I'll get onto that in a bit. But anyways, so the whole origin story is how it starts from the first film. I love the film series because when it came out, it was in 1993. You had a young Jennifer Aniston. She was probably like in her early 20s. She was still a teen. But Jennifer Aniston from Friends, right? This is her first acting debut role, was in Leprechaun. You had Mark Holton, I think his name was. He was the bully off of Pee Wee Herman. He was the big guy off of Teen Wolf. And he also played in a more recent film as John Wayne Gacy in the John Wayne Gacy film. And any role that he plays, he's always fucking amazing on it, right? They had some other actors, but not well-named ones. But the only other well-named actor that was really big at the time was Warwick Davis. Now, Warwick Davis, he's actually a little person, and he got his fame because he started off in a movie called Willow with Val Kilmer. He was basically the little person in that. And he's still acting today. He was the little bank goblin off of Harry Potter. I don't follow Harry Potter. But he does like anything that you see that has to do with horror movies or creature or fantasies, and there's a little person involved. It's probably Warwick Davis, the guy who played Leprechaun. But he's a fucking amazing actor. But anyways, back to the first one that we were talking about. So basically, in the first original Leprechaun, Jennifer Aniston and her dad, and yeah, it was just Jennifer Aniston and her dad. I'm trying to remember the story. They move into a house. It's old. It's beat up. It looks like shit, but it's like a middle of the house. Well, it's this big old land with the house in the middle of the property. So they bought it. They were fixing it up. Then they called for this painter. This painter comes with his coworker and his coworker's younger little brother. And the character played by Mark Holton, he's the guy who played the bully off of Pee-wee. He plays kind of dumb-witted, dumbfounded in this movie, But basically, the whole story goes, the house is really old. They start painting it. They find a crate. Then they remove the 4-leaf clover. The leprechaun wakes up. And when the leprechaun wakes up, you see a rainbow that goes out, and Mark Holton and his younger brother in the movie, they go and they find this gold in a beat-up truck. And they take one gold coin, but then, you know, he tries to bite it and then he swallows it. Yeah, I know. But it was very B-rate for build-up of it, but it was good, you know? Because then basically they broke out the story about how the Leprechaun comes out, you know? And the Leprechaun, little by little, starts chasing him, trying to follow his gold, counting all of his gold. And it was pretty cool how they did the whole premise of the story. So they basically follow the things that... He was a shoe shiner, so any shoes that he saw that was dirty, he was picking them up, cleaning them, and doing all that. And the whole story goes is that one of the painters, you know, the one who was working, he gets bit. He thinks it's a rodent, so he goes to the hospital. They all go, you know, in town to the hospital. And while they're there at the hospital, then the kid and Mark Holton, his character's name was Ozzy, they go to a pawn shop, drop off a coin, see if it was worth anything, because it was a gold coin. And then the whole time you find out that the Leprechaun, he's following him, and he's killing people one by one. The movie itself was originally supposed to be a children's film, but they figured it'd be a lot more entertaining if they tied in adults, made it more teen, like a tweener horror film. And they were right. They did really good for it. And it was all done with practical effects. And basically, the Leprechaun, or Warwick Davis, he drove like this little kid's car. Well, he walked to the, the pawn shop, finds the guy, and then he kills him by jumping on him with a pogo stick, which was like one of the craziest kills I've ever seen in the early 90s. I was like, what the hell? You never see that, you know? Had this dark humor twist to it. And later on, I'll talk about horror comedy later on in another episode, but it was kind of interesting how they did that. And then later on, it shows that he steals like one of those little Power Wheel cars and then drives off, tries to follow him so he can get his gold. And then they discovered that it was a leprechaun chasing him, and how do you kill a leprechaun? And eventually they figured out, okay, well, you just give him a 4-leaf clover. They happen to find a 4-leaf clover in this little patch by the house. You know, early horror films, right? And they end up killing the leprechaun. And he falls into a well, end of the movie. But when they did the movie, there was a lot of rumors going around that they want to use Lucky Charms, because there was a scene where Warwick Davis was looking through the house to see if he could find his gold. Pulls out a box of cereal, and it ends up being Lucky Charms, pours it, eats it. Well, General Mills, they got pissed off when they saw the scene. And they said, no, you can't use Lucky Charms because it's making fun of leprechauns, making them evil, right? They turned into this whole ordeal, and then at the last scene when one of the kids, well, the young kid, Ozzy's little brother, he shoots a piece of gum wrapped with 4-leaf clover into the throat of the leprechaun. And when he did that, basically, the whole ordeal, it was like, fuck you, Lucky Charms! And that was a wink to it, you know. So the first film, if you've never seen Leprechaun, or if you've never seen any of these films in this series, I recommend the first one and see how you like it. Because it's very B-rate, but it also, it's good quality B-rate. You know, they have good acting and everything. Jennifer Aniston didn't do too bad. It's not like most of these famous stars, they do a one-and-done horror film and they're just like, oh, I don't want to remember it, you know. She still is kind of like that, but her acting was on par. I mean, you see why she's still acting today, you know. But later on, that one became so popular that they figured, oh shit, we got to pop out a sequel. Because, you know, it was the late 90s, or not late 90s, early 90s, late 80s, like around 90, 91, around that time frame when they were filming it. And basically, they went to do part 2. Now, I wrote on my notes very briefly on it because part 2 was just like, oh my god. You couldn't get any more B-rate. So, everything that happened in the first film, bullshit, you know, they don't follow it. Right? It follows Warwick Davis as a leprechaun, and it shows that on his 1000th birthday, he could pick anybody, any woman that he wants to be his wife. Something happens, he gets frozen into a statue. Right? And basically, you know, he breaks out of that statue in the story, and he gets involved in this love triangle with this boyfriend and girlfriend. I like you, you like me, let's go out. That kind of deal, you know? And the whole story goes is that he's chasing after him because he thought they had his gold. He eats a gold coin, which ends up being a chocolate gold coin, gets stuck on a wall by the boy who's chasing after the girl he likes. End of film. It was awful. Like, it was, to me, and a lot of other horror fans, they will say part 2 was the worst out of the series. I mean, you have to put it on par with the reboot, which I'm going to get on later on. But part 2 was really bad, and that was the last one they put in theaters. Because the first one was in theaters, the second one was in theaters, but they said, nope. It bombed. It really did. And if you see part 2, if you happen to venture down it, you'll see why that part 2 was pulled, so quick from the theaters, and they never put another one in theaters again. But part 3, they redeemed himself. Part 3 was a little different. Part 3 I liked a little bit better because it goes in, well, it's a straight to video. First, I gotta mention that. But it was taking place in Las Vegas. And basically, the Leprechaun, he's woken again, basically. And he's... everything that happened in the second one, bullshit, So, he didn't blow up, he turned into a statue. That's basically what most of them had turned into. And in part 3, basically the same thing happens. He gets his necklace removed, turns from a statue to the Leprechaun, starts chasing after people, taking after his gold. And the only difference on this one, it takes place in Las Vegas, which is kind of cool. You never see too many horror films that take place in Vegas or inside a casino. Maybe like 4 or 5 I can name off my hand, but anyways, this was like one of the first horror films that took place in Vegas. So it was pretty cool how they did that premise on that. But Caroline Williams was in it, and if you don't remember who Caroline Williams is, she was Stretch off of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And I think this is the second horror film she was affiliated with. But anyways, Leprechaun, he's chasing after his goal like he always does. And you have all these other subplots going around. Like this chick, Caroline Williams, she thought she was ugly, nobody wanted her. And basically it was, I don't know if it was a medallion or a coin. They had something and they can wish to, like, it was granting them wishes. Kind of like a genie thing or the djinn. It was weird how they did that. But anyways, they did that. And she wished to, have her high school body back. So she ends up looking good and everything. Then Leprechaun, he goes around and he starts killing people. And then he sees Caroline Williams. And this is one of the best gore kill scenes, I think. One of the top 10, I would have to call it. But, he's basically seeing her looking at the mirror and he's like, oh, we can make you bigger here. We can make you bigger here. He's enlarging her chest and her back end, and then all of a sudden, blows up. Pretty cool. But then they also tied in, they have all these subplots going in part 3. But they also tied in that this guy, he was chasing after this call girl that he liked, and basically him and the Leprechaun, they had a scuffle. Leprechaun bit him, and then just like the werewolf thing, he just ends up trying to turn into a leprechaun little by little. And everything from looking like a wolf boy to start talking like him, like, oh, you got me gold, that kind of deal, yeah. And the whole story just basically goes on to like, okay, well, how do you kill the leprechaun? Oh, you burn his gold. Burn his gold, and he burns with his gold. And that's the end of part 3. And then the guy who was turning into a leprechaun basically popped right back into normal. And nothing had ever happened. Part 3 had a lot of promise. It's not as bad as part 2. But, I mean, part 3 was okay. If you guys got a chance to see it last week, I know SaWGuY or El Rey Network, they usually do it on St. Patrick's Day. They do, like, all the Leprechaun movies. So I was watching all this shit like, what? So, yeah. I know. But then you get into the fourth one. And the fourth one, I like it, because I'm a science nerd. But anyways, fourth one, they send his ass into space. The Leprechaun character. Now, how they did it, they basically said, oh, it's 2,000 years in the future. We're, super advanced for human beings, and we're going to go and discover this planet. And it was all CGI. It was just, like, terrible. I mean, the CGI, the effects, that was terrible, But the storyline was pretty cool. So basically they said, okay, they didn't do away with the fact that he was just blown up and then ends up as a statue again and all this other shit like in the previous sequels. They basically forget all the first 3, and then part 4, oh, the Leprechaun's in space, right? So these trained Marines, they go into this planet, and then they figured out, oh, there's a Leprechaun, and then he starts chasing after him. Then they find out that the real thing is that The Leprechaun had kidnapped somebody from a planet who was the leader of their planet, and he was trying to marry them so he can take over their planet, that kind of deal thing. And the army that had went in there, or the military group, they went in there to go save the woman because they figured they can use her blood as like an antibody, like something to cure diseases and stuff like that, right? So they brought the Leprechaun back, and they brought his future wife back, right? So the whole movie goes like, okay, people are dying, how are they dying? And then you figure out it's the Leprechaun. And they do like some futuristic kills, which is pretty cool, you know? And Miguel Nunes, he's actually in this film. A lot of people forget about Miguel Nunes. He was the guy that was off of can't remember the fucking zombie movie on the top of my head. I wrote it down in my damn notes. What was it? Return of the Living Dead. That's what it was. And then he was also, because I'm thinking of him in Jason 5. He was in Jason 5. He was the guy always complaining about the damn enchiladas, taking a shit, and then Jason just puts a freaking, machete right through him. But he was in that movie in part 4. And anyways, the whole story goes is that this military group, they're really advanced. They're trying to get the Leprechaun and make sure that he's not going to take over or whatever. Well, he ends up brainwashing the princess, and the princess is one of the Baywatch models. I can't remember her name. I wrote it down somewhere, but I'm like, because this is her famous film that she did. Other than Baywatch, she did this, But the whole story goes that he's trying to marry her, then he brainwashes her into marrying him, and then she figures out he's a piece of shit, and, then they do this whole thing where they're trying to escape and leave him in the spaceship and, plant a bomb in the spaceship to blow up. And basically the whole story goes is that Leprechaun runs amok, he gets some of the scientists, he turns them into different creatures and shit like that, and then they send him into space and they see him blow up. Boom. End of part 4. And part 4 was okay, Out of all the 4 original series, I would have to say that part 2 was like the most bland, kind of dumb, because every horror character goes through that. I mean, the Wishmaster went through that, for Christ's sake, with part 4, I get that franchises run stale, but there was so much potential with the Leprechaun. And with the Leprechaun character itself, Warwick Davis is just fucking amazing. He, the fact that he has such a heavy, thick British accent, but he can still play that Irish character really well and play off like a leprechaun was just like, whoa, He owned that role. There's nobody else that could take him, right? And right after they did part 4, they did part 5 and 6, right? Part 5 and 6, they basically skewed off the story and said, okay, wait a minute, going into space route didn't work, so let's send Leprechaun in the hood, right? So, yeah, that's a weird take, right? I get that you send them in space. I get that they get sent to hell or whatever, but doing a Leprechaun in the hood, like, really? And I think it was straight to TV that they did it. They send it straight to Sci-Fi Channel or one of the horror movie channels when it came out back in 2000. And when they did that, they also released it on DVD at the same time. Ice-T was in it. I explained it in my earlier episode on Gangster Horror, that whole thing, what happened with that. But, the 5th one was okay. It followed basically a group of kids, group of young guys who were kind of gang-affiliated, kind of not. They never explained it in the movie. And basically, they're trying to be rappers, And Leprechaun was chasing after him, and then also trying to chase after Ice-T for stealing his gold. And then, the ending was weird, he gets locked away, then he gets the necklace put on him, turns back into a stone, and then they did this whole, ending credit sequence where they had, a rap song, "Left you in the hood, ain't do you no good, left you in the hood," yeah. Then, his last one that Warwick Davis did, as the Leprechaun, was Leprechaun in the Hood Part 2, or they call it Leprechaun Back to the Hood. And that one was actually pretty cool. They basically used the same premise as the first film, but they just did it in Part 6, where he's in the hood, So he's in the middle of, the cross-gang thing with all this shit going on. He's in the middle of the gangs. He's smoking weed, doing this. So, of course, you have your weed jokes and all that shit in there about him getting high and all this other stuff. You have a little bit about it in Part 5, okay. But it ended up being a cult favorite, Everyone's always talked about Leprechaun. Anybody you remember talking about Leprechaun? Oh, yeah, I see Leprechaun in the hood. It's like, no, that was Part 5, but okay. Give you credit for remembering. That's how I think, But part 5 and 6, they were in the hood. And then part 6, they changed his look to how he looked. And they made him look more demonic, more demon-like. And they gave him a cape, made his hair hella long, made him look more grungy looking. And it was pretty cool how they did that. I mean, if they would have did that same style and then just reboot the series with Warwick Davis, I think there's a lot of potential left in that movie, in that series, you know? At least I thought. But then, if you're a wrestling fan, you know that the big wrestling company, WWE, they do their own movies now. You know, it's something new that they started doing. And, well, anyways, they bought the rights to Leprechaun, because I guess TriStar, the company that owned it, they basically were going bankrupt. They sold the licensing to WWE, and they had a wrestler who was like a little person. His name was Hornswoggle. And I don't know his real name, Dylan something, or if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments below, because I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But anyways, they were going to go and do a Leprechaun origin story. And I'll never forget, the first day they released that movie, I have a friend that's, that follows me. And I saw, he was like, this is the biggest piece of crap, take a shit all over on everything in the Leprechaun series. And I thought, no, maybe he's just being too harsh, right? So I watched it recently, and oh man, like it had nothing to do with the Leprechaun, other than the fact of like his origin story. Like they go to Ireland, it follows these kids that are in Ireland. They fuck with his gold, and it's not the actual Leprechaun. It's a little creature, like it looks like a Velociraptor almost. Velociraptor mixed with a xenomorph. That's how fucked up it was. And it was chasing him around and everything. And it's just, the reboot, it went straight to DVD. They never released it in the theaters. And they really just, they cash cowed it, And it's a shame, because that series had a lot of potential. I like what they did in Back to the Hood, which was part 6. They explained his story is that, back in the Middle Ages, they would have like leprechauns watching over all the king's gold, and when the king was killed or somebody had taken over, they would kill off these little leprechauns that would watch the gold and stuff, right? Well, one didn't want to go down, and he was magical, which ended up being the one leprechaun. Now that's a cool storyline that they could have followed from Back in the Hood Part 2. And I love that whole story and the concept that they did with that. Like, holy shit, how come they didn't do that in the first one? But, you get better as you make different movies, you know what I'm saying? But that was a good concept that they did, but they just didn't use it in the origins. And I'm just like pulling my freaking hair out, like, yeah, that they could have done so much better on that, but they didn't, But then SaWGuY, they basically bought the rights from WWE, and they made, what was it, part 8, 9, now there's a 10th Leprechaun film. And it's basically now, it's just the name that they carry on, like Leprechaun the Returns, or Leprechaun the Red Clover, I saw some of those, and I wouldn't recommend it. I really wouldn't. I mean, if you like the Leprechaun kind of mystique and things like that, okay, it's more thriller, it's more sci-fi, horror-based, but you hardly ever see it. The effects aren't there, it's all CGI, it's just, they could have really done better. But I like to remember the Leprechaun, and this is the reason why I'm doing the episode. I like to remember the Leprechaun as that scary-ass little guy that just came after you if you fucked with his gold. I mean, I even liked it when he was in the hood. Hell, that was one of the better ones in the series. I even liked it when he was in space, I know I'm probably getting a hell of a lot of comments like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You like him in space? It was a cool concept. It was different. It was odd, But at the same time, sending him to the hood was odd, because you have a lot of these horror franchises that get stale. They throw him somewhere, like Jason, they put him in space. That was a cool concept if they would have continued it, but they didn't, And that's basically where it is with that series, I chose that series, obviously, because of St. Patrick's Day. I know SaWGuY's late, but I wanted to make sure that y'all had your green beer fill and everything like that, and that way you can take into this episode and enjoy, It's an enjoyable, I would say it's more towards horror comedy now. It fits in that genre. I'm not a fan of horror comedy. But what I like about this is that they weren't trying to push for horror comedy with it. You know, they had some comedic things in it that kind of tied in. Like, I don't know, like in the first one. You know, fuck you, Lucky Charms, and they kill the leprechaun. I mean, that's funny to me. It's dark humor. You know, if it calls for dark humor and it ties it in and it's really good, I'm all for it. If it was straight to go as a comedy with horror twist, no. Now you're bending the rules there. Now you're breaking my balls here on this. You know, because horror, it's not meant to be funny. But you'll hear more of my thoughts later on that. That's another episode I have. But anyways, the whole Leprechaun series, if you've never seen it, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not a bad series. It really isn't. It's very B-rate. I recommend watching it. Actually, I recommend buying it, because now you can find the whole like Blu-ray box set or the DVD set. I got the DVD set for $5 and I had all 7 films, you know, from 1 through Back to the Hood and then the Origins for like $5. You know, they have it in Blu-ray, I think, for 10, but I was like, stick with DVD, you know. Try to keep that old rustic feel of like the VHS when it came out, you know. But they still are continuing the series. Sci-fi exclusive. If you're a fan of it, if you've never seen it, take a look at it, take a gander. You know, you might be disappointed in some, but then there's some just like, whoa, what the hell? They could have really continued, you know? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Get back at me. I want to know your guys' opinions on it, because it was one of those series that deserved a lot more, but just didn't get that enough attention. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, hope you all enjoy this episode on the Leprechaun series. One of my classic favorites that I like. I know normally I get into horror genres and stuff like that, but now I'm going to start bringing you the good shit. You know, that was all hors d'oeuvres, appetizers. Now I'm going to give you the meat and potatoes, alright? So tune in for the next episode, episode 13. I'll catch y'all later, alright? Thanks for tuning in.